One of the hardest things in bass fishing to buy is the right rod for specific techniques, especially if you're buying online. Here at the Hookup Tackle, we spend hours every day talking to customers about how to find the perfect rod for the bait or the technique that they are using. So Jeff and I thought it would be great to start a series, kind of a buyer's guide, if you will, on how to select the right rod for the specific bait or technique that you guys are using. So today we are going to start with one of our favorite techniques, and that is the chatterbait. Now, chatterbait is not only something that we use all the time, but it's also a very misunderstood rod in how to select the right rod. So today we're going to break down chatterbait rods, and we're going to help you find the perfect chatterbait rods. If you're ready, let's go. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle. The Hookup Tackle is the world's largest showcase of Megabass products, featuring baits and colors not found at any other dealer. The Hookup also offers a wide display of OSP, Evergreen, Depths, Lucky Craft, Jackall, and many more. The Hookup Tackle is owned and operated by family, is staffed by guides and verified tackle nerds who love helping anglers elevate their craft. If you're in the Phoenix area, we'd love to have you stop by our showroom and check out the wonderful world of Megabass and the Hookup for yourself. If you shop online, there are almost 10,000 SKUs of Megabass products alone, with hundreds of other companies and new products being added daily. So next time you're looking for that hard to find bait, that color your fish have never seen before, or maybe you just want to elevate your game, look at thehookuptackle.com. Welcome back, everyone. I am Ben Kohler with the Hookup Tackle, aka the Tackle Otaku, being filmed by my buddy Jeff, Jeffrey the King, on Instagram. Of course, we would love for you to follow us on our company page, the Hookup Tackle USA. Today, we are going to start a new series on how to find the perfect rod for specific techniques. Now, if you are the type of angler that just wants to get one rod to do a bunch of different shit, this is not necessarily geared towards you. This is going to be geared towards the guy that wants to elevate specific techniques so that he can maximize his time on the water and land the most fish possible in each technique. So today, we are going to start with the chatterbait. Now, pretty much every bass fisherman has some form of chatterbait in their tackle box and in their arsenal at this point. Before we get into the rods and how to find the right rod, it's important to understand the bait, what the bait does, how the bait operates, so that we know what exactly we're looking for when selecting a rod for this thing. So, to break it down very quickly, this is a Evergreen Jackhammer, pretty much the staple in the industry. A chatterbait is essentially a jig with a blade attached to the head. Now, in the case of the jackhammer, this blade, as it's pushed through the water, the blade is going to vibrate hard and it's going to knock on the head. So it's creating a sound, it's creating a vibration, and it's just a great way to present a bait in very similar conditions to where you would throw a square bill. The chatterbait was really designed originally to fish similar to a square bill and kind of be an alternative to a square bill, running the bank, fishing through grass, over weed beds, around cover, skipping under docks, etc. Over the years, chatterbaits have evolved into some heavier options like a 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce, stuff to fish more deeper ledges, over structure. But the mainstay of chatterbaits is still that 3/8 and 1/2 ounce shallow water to mid-depth range. And so that's what we're really going to focus on today, how to find the perfect rod for these things. Now, one of the questions that we get asked a lot here in store is, hey man, I'm looking for a chatterbait / spinnerbait rod. Can you help me? And this is where we know that this is a very misunderstood technique, because a chatterbait and a spinnerbait, while they both have blades, right? There's a blade on the front here and there's blades on the arm of a spinnerbait. So it's easy to understand how an angler would think, oh, this must be the same rod. These are actually two very, very different techniques that require two different rods if you want to maximize your time throwing these. A spinnerbait is essentially a jig. So it is a single hook, solid connection. So as you're pulling this through, as the fish bite, if it moves together just like a jig would move. So you really want to throw this on a faster type rod than you would want to do on a chatterbait. A chatterbait is a direct contact, but it has this pivot point on it. So it acts completely different than a spinnerbait once the fish is hooked. So if you think of a square bill, right? We mentioned the square bill. One of the things that we're always looking for in a good square bill rod is a rod that's soft enough to land these fish, right? Because they're often hooked on the outside of the mouth, and then the bait is pivoting on those treble hooks, which creates sometimes the ability for the bass to pull off. It's the same way in the chatterbait. Once they are hooked, it now has this kind of pivot point that can kind of tear and shake that hook out if we don't have the right rod and the right gear for presenting it. So this is what we're looking to accomplish, right? We're looking to accomplish basically 4 things. We want the rod to feel good in our hands, right? Because we want to enjoy our time fishing. We want the rod to have great castability. And this is something that we hear spoken about a lot, like the load of the rod, right? And what the load is the load is when we tie this bait onto the rod, how does that rod bend in the back and in the forward so that as we go to cast, the rod is loading with the weight of the bait, and then as we come forward, the rod is actually helping us toss that bait out for accurate casting. So it's important that we get accurate casting since this is a shallow water technique the way we're talking about it right now. The third thing is fishability. Is it sensitive? Can you feel the bait vibrating? Can you feel when it hits a rock or gets in grass so you know when to rip it out or to let it sink or whatever it is that we're doing, right? And then the fourth thing is, how does that rod help me land the fish? And this is a very, very important piece of the puzzle when we're talking about chatterbaits, because this is the piece that you can't feel in the store. You can't see the spec for this online, right? This is something that time on the water is going to tell you the answer. But if you're losing fish on a chatterbait, if you're feeling the bite, you're setting the hook, and then somewhere between hook set and boat, they're coming off, they're spitting it, you're dumping them, something is going wrong to where they're not getting in the boat, then it's not the right rod. So the right rod should help us land those fish. So those are the 4 things that we're going to look at with the rod. So if you guys are ready, let's start breaking them down and let's find the perfect chatterbait rod. Okay, so as we start looking at rods, let's get a couple of things just kind of ironed out, right? So there are a couple of things that you're always going to hear spoken about with pretty much every rod manufacturer. And the first is the rod power. Now the power of the rod is going to describe how heavy is this rod or how light is this rod, right? How heavy of a bait can I throw or how light of a bait can I throw on this? Power is going to be referred to as things like medium, medium heavy, heavy power, right? So those are terms that are thrown around universally when it comes to rods. Now, where it gets tricky is medium heavy for one brand doesn't necessarily mean medium heavy for another brand. And even to make it even trickier, sometimes within the same brand, one medium heavy rod is actually heavier than another medium heavy rod. So when we're looking at powers, this is basically our way of dwindling down the 1 million rod options that are on the market down to maybe a smaller square, right? We're just trying to dissect to get to the one perfect rod. So what we're looking for in terms of a chatterbait is generally something in a medium heavy or heavy power so that we can handle that 3/8 to 3/4 ounce rating. And the power of the rod is generally going to dictate how heavy of a bait we can throw. So you'll see on a lot of rods, you'll see lure ratings like this that will have, you know, how heavy, what ounce can I throw, what's the lightest they've built the rod for, what's the heaviest, right? And this is, again, a guideline. Some rod manufacturers have this down to a science, and it's scientifically tested where they're putting rods in machines and they're breaking it and doing different things to determine, like, okay, this is the ideal weight for this rod. Other companies are just tying shit on there and casting them and fishing them and being like, okay, it throws this pretty good, right? So again, this is a guideline. You will determine what the rod can or can't do. But one thing that's really important to remember is with chatterbaits, you have to take in the weight of the bait itself plus the weight of the trailer. So if you are throwing a 1/2 ounce chatterbait and you are putting on a 4 or 5 inch trailer like a Yamamoto Zako or Swim Senko or something like that, then you are going to have basically a 3/4 ounce bait, not a 1/2 ounce bait. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're looking at ratings and you're kind of deciding between powers. The second thing that is universally spoken about with rods is the action of the rod. So this is the term fast action, regular action, extra fast action, moderate, right? So all of these things are going to be thrown around within the industry. And again, to make it even more confusing, fast action for one brand is not necessarily the same as fast action for a different brand, right? So this is generally speaking about the way the rod is going to react, okay? So all rods are going to bend to a certain point, right? So if you think of the rod as you're retrieving and you get a bite and the rod moves, right? If it bounces back really quick, that's generally a faster action. If the rod is kind of a little slower or more absorbing, that's more of a moderate or a regular or a slow action, okay? So these are things that we're going to be thinking about with the chatterbait. So again, getting back to the idea that the chatterbait has the ability to pivot and lose a lot of fish if the rod is too fast or too heavy, we're going to err on the side of caution with the chatterbait when we can and go with something that's more of a moderate or slow action. And that's why over the last few years, you've seen a huge surge in glass type rods for chatterbait fishing, because glass rods are generally much slower in their action, right? They bend deeper into the rod and they're just slower in action, so that when the fish is head shaking down there and that chatterbait is twisting, the rod is absorbing that head shake and absorbing that twist to keep those fish hooked, right? So when it comes to chatterbait fishing, we're looking for something that's more in the moderate to slow action, and then something that's in more of the medium heavy to heavy power, okay? And again, this is just helping us dissect the huge amount of rods down into a smaller window. From here, it really comes down to how the rod feels in our hands. You know, do you have a preference? Do you like EVA foam? Do you like cork? Do you like split grip, full grip? You know, a lot of this kind of stuff. And then how the rod is actually built, where it bends, how it bends, guide placement, etc. So from here, we're going to start breaking down and showing some of our favorite rods and why they're good for chatterbait fishing. So I have been holding what is pretty much known as the industry standard in chatterbait fishing, and this is the Evergreen Combat Stick. This is specifically the Jackhammer Rod, okay? So this rod was built specifically for throwing the jackhammer. This rod was mirrored off of the JDM version of this, which is called the Leopard. The Leopard has been one of Evergreen International's staple glass rods for years and years. When Brett Hite designed this rod for Evergreen to be the perfect jackhammer rod, at the time that they started building it, there was only 3/8 and 1/2 ounce. As the rod building process started going on, then they started adding the 3/4 ounce, the 1.25 ounce. So it became important to build a rod that could do more than just the lighter weights. So this is a great idea if you're looking for a rod to kind of do everything, right? If you want one rod to kind of cover the whole gamut, this is a great one. This is a 7.3 heavy glass, right? So what glass does that graphite doesn't do is glass has the ability to be slowed down. Remember, we talked that we wanted that slower taper, right? So we want that rod to kind of bend through that midsection and have that nice slower action. And what that's going to do is when we cast this bait, it's going to load great, and it's going to just help us propel our cast very accurately. So it's going to have great load. Remember, that was one of the things we were talking about. The importance of load here is that very few of us are KVD, right? I mean, Jeff is. But me, I need help from the rod, okay? So if I am absolutely perfect on my timing on my forward cast, I can throw a chatterbait on a very stiff rod, very fast rod with relatively no load. But I have to be 100% accurate when I let go of the line. Or if I'm just a split second behind, when I throw it, the rod's gonna veer it off to the left. Or if I'm a split second too early, when I throw it, it's gonna veer it off to the right. So having this load gives me a little bit of error room, right? It lets me be like 93% accurate on my release. So as I'm coming forward, that rod's gonna be like, dude, I got you. And it's gonna pitch it right where I want it to go, right? So the load is great on this. The sensitivity on glass is good. It's definitely not as high as it would be on graphite, right? So if you were to put a chatterbait on a straight graphite rod, you are literally gonna feel every little movement and vibration you're gonna feel. On glass, it's going to dampen it a little bit. So you're gonna sacrifice a little sensitivity. You can still feel it just fine, especially when you get in a groove. What you'll notice is okay, it has a certain pull as it's moving through the water well, and as it gets bogged down with grass or starts coming through cover, it just kind of changes the feel, right? But what glass does better than any other material is it lands fish. And so when the fish is hooked, when the fish bites, it softens the bite so you don't feel it quite as fast to your hand, which allows the fish to get the chatterbait back in their crusher, exhale, so that when you set the hook is going through the hard part of the fish's mouth, which will help you keep them pinned. If you feel the bite too fast and you swing, then they get hooked very shallow in the mouth, and it's really easy for a bass to toss a chatterbait. Again, getting back to the idea that this thing pivots, if a bass is hooked shallow, right, then this is outside of the mouth. It has all this ability to shake free. But if the bass comes up and eats the whole thing and exhales, right, and this is back in the crusher, then it acts more as one unit until the bass opens its mouth, and then it has just a little bit of wiggle room. So we want this thing to be as far back in the fish's mouth as we can to maximize our chance at landing them. Also, as this is shaking and moving and pivoting, the advantage of glass is it's going to bend deep into the rod and allow them to absorb the shock, okay? So, the one downside to glass, lack of sensitivity. The second downside to glass is they tend to be a little bit heavier and clunkier rods. So if you're coming from very high-end premium gear and all of a sudden you add a glass rod to your arsenal and you don't have glass rods in it already, it's just gonna feel heavy and clunky because it's softer and it's thicker and it's heavier by weight. So you're gonna have to get over that if you want the best option for chatterbait fishing. If you can't get over it, then we're gonna highlight some options and some non-glass rods that you may find that just work better for you for whatever reason, okay? So, if we're picking one rod to do everything with chatterbaits, the Evergreen Jackhammer Rod is usually the starting point. This is the place to begin. It's $199, so it's kind of, right in the middle of the price range. It's not too expensive, but it just does everything very, very well. Now, an alternative to the jackhammer that has come out onto the market this year is from Daiwa, and this is the Daiwa Rebellion glass series. So this is also a 7.4 heavy glass rod. Very similar lure rating, that same 3/8 to 2 ounce lure rating. This is a much lighter rod than the jackhammer. It's a little bit shorter grip, so it's laid out a little bit differently. It bends slightly different, but to the actual touch, it weighs substantially less than the jackhammer rod at the same price, at $199. So a lot of guys that want that glass action, but just don't like the weight of the jackhammer, you might want to check out the Daiwa Rebellion, another great option at the same price point. As more alternatives come out on the market, Shimano is also getting into the game with their Expride series. So they make two rods that can be great options. This one is a 7.2 medium heavy glass rod. Now this is actually designed as their square bill rod, but it works great for the lighter sizes of jackhammers. If you're throwing a 3/8 ounce jackhammer or a 1/2 ounce jackhammer, or you're throwing maybe this smaller stealth blade or some of the smaller, more compact chatterbaits, this can be a great one. Now, because it's a little bit shorter and it's a little bit lighter power, it's only a medium heavy glass instead of a heavy glass, it's not really gonna handle that 3/4 or 5/8 ounce and up size. So this really wants to throw shallow. That 3/8 ounce is perfect for this, as well as the stealth blade. So good solid option from Shimano and the Expride. I know a lot of you guys are Expride fans. This is a great one. Shimano Expride also has a 7-foot medium glass, which is a perfect one for the stealth blade. So if a lot of you guys are throwing that smaller, more compact chatterbait, or even more like finessey stuff like 1/4 ounce or 3/16 ounce chatterbaits, the 7-foot medium glass can be a great one, but it is way underpowered for throwing a full-size chatterbait or full-size jackhammer. So think of this as more like your finesse approach, but if you're actually going to be throwing the full-size version, you're going to want to stay in the 7.2 or one of the other rods that we spoke about. All right, guys, so I've been throwing some terms around. I want to make sure that we are on the same page, right? So I've been referencing the jackhammer. This is just the industry standard. This is what we talk about because this is what most of us throw. But it doesn't matter here if it's the jackhammer, chatterbait, whatever it is that you throw, right? But when I start talking about the stealth blade or more finesse approach, I want you to see the difference. So this is a full-size jackhammer, and then this is the jackhammer stealth blade. You can see how much smaller the blade and the profile is on this guy. So, the stealth version is just going to vibrate a whole lot less. It's much easier to throw. It's a smaller trailer. The full-size version is just going to be heavier, bigger, thicker trailer, right? So that's the reason why we would go down in a size or up in a size in these rods to have the right rod, okay? Okay, another company that makes a couple of sleeper jackhammer rods is Jackall in their Poison Adrena lineup. Now, they make a glass rod that is great for the smaller chatterbait, okay? And this is the 610 medium glass. So if you guys are throwing that smaller, more finessey jackhammer or chatterbait, this is a great one for that. Again, it's only a medium, so it's definitely not going to handle the full-size bait, but your smaller, lighter weight baits, it's great. Now, Jackall also makes a very good alternative if you don't like glass. So again, remember that with the glass, they're gonna be a little heavier, a little clunkier, right? So a lot of guys just can't get over that. Well, Jackall came out with a new 7.4 heavy rod that is a graphite rod, but it is more of a moderate action. So even though it is a graphite rod, it's still going to bend through this middle section of the rod. So it's going to have that smooth middle bend to it for absorbing the shock. It's not going to absorb it quite as well as glass, but it's going to do it much, much better than a traditional like fast action rod would. This is a great one for that 1/2 ounce, to 3/4 ounce chatterbait. So if you guys are throwing the full size, bigger trailer, it's a really, really good one if you want a non-glass alternative. Okay, and then finally, getting into the Megabass lineup. Megabass makes a series of rods called Valkyrie. And the Valkyrie are all glass carbon composite rods. So all of their rods have fiberglass and carbon in them, so they're gonna have that nice, slow, moderate kind of bend to them. So they're perfect for throwing a chatterbait, perfect for throwing a square bill, crankbait, etc. This is the 7.1 medium heavy, which is one of my favorites. It's amazing for throwing the stealth blade and the smaller jackhammer. So I throw the 3/8 ounce jackhammer a lot. This is a great one for just kind of probing the banks and checking it up there. If you guys are throwing the heavier sizes, then you could obviously just bump up in power here in the Valkyrie. What's cool about the Valkyrie is obviously it's styled beautifully. It also has this adjustable grip system. So a lot of times with the jackhammer, I may be in real tight quarters and I need to shorten the length of my handle to make little tight, you know, kind of pistol grip type roll casts. And then, you know, I turn the corner and I'm back out fishing a grass flat where I need, you know, the traditional double-handed cast to throw, you know, a longer cast. So just a really cool rod. This is definitely going to be at the higher end of the price point, but if you're looking for something super premium to really crush your jackhammer chatterbait fishing, this is a great one. Then another really solid option that's kind of been a surprise for a lot of us, if you like a non-glass rod, is in the Destroyer P5 line, and this is the Dark Sleeper rod. Now the Dark Sleeper was designed to throw the Dark Sleeper, right? Which is a small little swim bait. This is designed as a bottom contact rod, but they've built it very soft through the midsection. So it's got incredible sensitivity as long as the rod is under load. So it makes a great swim jig rod. It makes a great lighter duty chatterbait rod. So again, if you're throwing that stealth blade, more finessey options, up to, I would say, like a 3/8 ounce jackhammer, this can be a really solid option. If you're going to be throwing that 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce jackhammer, you're definitely going to overload this guy. But for that more finesse approach, it weighs nothing and it has that beautiful bend at the top if you're looking, again, for something in that premium rod offering from Megabass. Those are our favorite rods. And remember, there's no right or wrong to this. The reason there are so many rods is because different people are going to sync with certain rods. And the perfect rod for you may not be the perfect rod for me. So it's important to just be open-minded. You know, certainly take whatever information that we have here. We're happy to share it. And then, you know, use your own on-the-water time to make some decisions for yourself, right? Now, if you already have a rod and you're trying to make it work, remember that you can also change the rod's ability to feel and to land fish by simply changing up your line, right? Now, majority of time that we are throwing a chatterbait, we are throwing it on some form of fluorocarbon. 20 pound is what I usually throw. I might go down to 16 or even 14 if I'm throwing the smaller finessey stuff, but 20 pound fluoro is usually perfect. Now, this is the perfect combination for me on my glass chatterbait rods. So, you know, fluorocarbon has very little stretch to it. There's still some, but very little. It just complements the rod perfectly. And remember, it's all one system. So the rod, the line, the reel, all one system to get the fish into the boat. If your rod is too heavy, you could maybe sacrifice fluoro and go to mono, and that will give you a little bit more stretch. If your rod is too whippy, if it's too soft, too light, then you could always just jump to a braid and have no stretch, and that will stiffen it a little bit. So you can do a little bit of line changing and alter, you know, the ability of that rod to do more or less. The other thing that's very important to talk about with chatterbait is your reel, and most importantly, your gear ratio. So for me, it is very important that I stay in that 6-to-1 gear ratio. When you are fishing a chatterbait, it is very easy to fish these things too fast. And if you fish them too fast, instead of this thing down there swimming perfect, it is going to start to roll on its side. So what we want is we want this thing tracking perfectly straight. We don't ever want it to kind of go up on its side because then it's not performing right. It snags much easier. So for me, I just seem to have one speed on my retrieve, and I need my reels to help me with retrieve speed. So a 6-to-1 is the perfect speed for that. If you're good at slowing down, you may be able to get away with a 7-to-1, but never an 8-to-1. You guys are definitely going to have it rolling off to the side. So try to stay right in this sweet spot of 6, 7 at the max if you can. All right, guys, that is a wrap. I hope this was beneficial and useful to you guys. If we missed anything, or if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. If you guys want to see any of these baits in the water, Jeff and I did do a video a month or so back on the new Stealth Blade jackhammer, so you can see them in the tank, see them with different trailers, etc. So definitely check that out. If you haven't subscribed to our channel already, we would love you to subscribe. I nailed it, Jeff.
We would love you?
We would love you. We would love you.
That sounded so awkward.
It did?
Yeah, I don't know why. It just sounded really, really awkward.
Well, let's redo it. If you haven't subscribed to our channel already, please do. Jeff would love you if you do. Is that better, Jeff?
Yeah, that works too.
Okay, perfect. So, as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate the business and the support. Jeff will put links to everything that we spoke about down below, but please holler at us if you have any questions. And until next time, peace.